We continue now at the top of Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph in Mesechet Kesubos. This is Kesubos Daf 12a. On the previous summit, the Gemara had a brisa, and the brisa said, let's say you have a situation where a woman gets married, but there are edim that she had no relations in that marriage, and then she goes and marries a second person, so the halacha is he has to assume that she might be a ba'ula. He cannot have a tainas besulim because, again, she was already married, therefore it's assumed that she may be a ba'ula, and furthermore, she's entitled to a ksuba of just 100. And the Gemara says, Amar Rabba says, Zos Omeres, this brisa proves, Kansa becheskas basula, if a person marries a woman and he has a presumption, he's thinking she's a basula, because again, there were edim that she had no relations at the time that she was married. V'nimtzas ba'ula, and turns out she's actually a ba'ula, yesh la ksuba mana, apparently she does get a ksuba of 100. Rashi over here says, Zos Omeres, Tahavadai becheskas basula kansa, certainly he married her with the presumption she was a basula, to samach edim, because he was relying on the witnesses. V'kamer ein yochol lafsida mana haroi lalmana, min hanisuin, and what does the brisa say? She is entitled to the ksuba of an almana min hanisuin, meaning the ksuba of 100, so that's why you see from here, even though he married her becheskas basula, so still she's going to get a ksuba mana. And the Gemara continues, Ravashi, no, in regular case, I'll really tell you, less lakla, that she gets nothing. If a person gets married, and she is becheskas basula, it turns out she's a bu'ula, so that's like a mekach to, says Ravashi, and she gets nothing. Veshani hacha, but it's different over here, shaharei kon sarishan, because here, it's not just a situation of cheskas basula, then it turns out she's a bu'ula. Here, she actually was married to a husband at first. There was a first marriage, and therefore it's different in this situation, and that's why she's going to be entitled to the money. And the Gemara says, V'nechosh shema tachtav zinsa, but wait a minute. Why aren't we afraid that there really was adultery over here? Because again, there were edim that she did not have relations with the first husband. She was never with the first husband enough time to have relations. And so therefore, we really should have this question over here, that perhaps she committed adultery. Now Rashi over here says, V'nechosh shema tachtav zinsa, we should be afraid that maybe this happened while there was a kedushin, while she was married. Rashi says, Amasnisin parech. Rashi says, this question is actually going on the Mishnah. However, in the Mesoras Hashas, Tzarech Lomar Abraisa changes it to the Braisa. The question is on the Braisa. Because what does it say? It says the second one can have no claim, saying that I thought she was a basula and now she's not a basula, etc. And we don't have them come to Bezdin. We don't try to find out whether it happened, whether this was adultery. Maybe she's assertim. Now I understand the earlier cases. We had some earlier opinions that if again she gets married and there's a presumption she's a basula, she turns out she's a ba'ula, she gets a ksuba. Lo makshin, we don't ask over there. Because there it could really be that they did go to court, and the edim said that there was a znus that was previous to the marriage, it wasn't adultery. But over here it says there is no claim. That means they're certainly not going to bezin over here. So again, the question is, why don't we have that concern? And the Gemara answers simply, Amar Rav Sharvia says, Kagon shekidesh ubal the altar. The case over here is where right after the kedushin there was relations immediately. There was no time for adultery. Rashi over here says, Kashekidesh uval the altar, Garsina velo Garsina, Kashekidesh la altar uval the altar. Shalo pirish mimena bein kedushin labila. The point is he was never separated from her between the kedushin and the relations. Devadai lo tachtav zin. So there's absolutely no doubt. Therefore, certainly she did not commit adultery. And the Gemara continues, V'ika damasni la masnisa. Now, some people have this entire discussion here, again, with Rabba, with the Zos Omeres, and Rav Ashi making the distinction, and Rav Sharvia saying the cases there was a Kiddushin and immediate relations. They have that whole conversation on our Mishnah. The Mishnah said, Besula almona grusha chalutza min hanesuin. You have a case of a Besula, similar to the case of the Braisa, and then she's either a widow, or she's a divorcee, or she's a chalutza from the Nesuin, but again, she's a Besula, she never had relations. So ksubasan mana, so the halach is again, she's going to get a ksuba of 100. Ve'in len tainas basulin, and again, there's no tainas basulin. You can't claim that you thought she was a basula, and then it turns out she's not a basula, because again, she was previously married. And so the Gemara says, basula min hanisuin hechem ashkachasla. First of all, how do you ever have a case of a woman that's a basula, but she was married? And the answer is, kagon shenichnas l'chuppah v'lo nivela. The case is, she entered the wedding canopy, but she never had relations. And so on that Mishnah, Rabba says, Rabba says, Zos Omeres, this shows, kansa becheskas basula v'nim v'nimsas be'ula ksubasa mana, that if he married her on the presumption she's a basula, and then it turns out she's a be'ula, that's the case of the Mishnah, she still gets the ksuba of 100. Rashi over here says, V'ika damasni lalahad rabba, Rav Ashi, Rav Sharvia masnis. And again, this whole conversation, Rabba, Rav Ashi, and Rav Sharvia is going on the Mishnah. Zoso meres mina katani masnis, and ein lohen tainas basulam. Again, there's no tainas basulam over here, and therefore it seems to be, again, the same idea. It's kansa becheskas basula, v'nimsas bula, she gets 100. And the Gemara continues along the same lines as before. Rav Ashi says, Liola me'malach, really, I'll tell you, Baal Males Laklal, really, in a normal case, she would get nothing. Veshani hacha, but it's different over here, Sharei Nichnas Alachuppah, because here it's not simply married with the presumption of a Basula and turned out to be a Ba'ula, there she would get nothing. It's like a Mekachtos. But over here, she actually had entered into a Chuppah previously, so it's different. And the Gemara asks, similar to before, V'leicha Sheshem Atachtav Zin, so why aren't we concerned that maybe she committed adultery? As Rashi says, V'amai Tani Ein Lan Basulam. Why is there no claim of Basulam? There should be a claim. You should go to court and you should investigate and make sure there was no adultery. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Sharvia says, Kakidish Uvala Alter. The case over here is that there was a Kiddushin and there was relations right away, so there was no time, there was no opportunity for a situation of adultery. And the Gemara now just notes, Man Damasni La Abraisa, the one who has this whole conversation going on the Braisa, that's at the top of the Amud, Kol Shekena Masnis, and certainly the conversation would apply if it would go on our Mishnah. However, Uman Damasni La Masnisin, however, the one who learns the conversation going on our Mishnah, Aval Abraisa Lo, but on the Braisa you can't have the same conversation. Mishum Matzi Amar Lo Ano Aidim Samchi, because there he has a stronger claim. There he can say to her, I was relying on witnesses. There were actually witnesses that said that you did not have relations with that first husband. And Rashi over here explains, Man Damasni Lo Lahad Rabba Rav Ashi Abraisa. This whole conversation between Rabba and Rav Ashi going on the Braisa, Kol Shekena Masnis, and conversation would for sure apply to the Mishnah. The Kevan di Abraisa Afagav de Omru Eidim Lo Nistra Larishon V'Sheni Zeh Becheskas Basula Kansa. Because if going on the Braisa, in that case you actually have witnesses that said that she was never in seclusion with the first husband, and it was a clear situation of a presumption that she's a basula. And still, Rav Ashi is able to respond to Rabba and say, "Liolam lo tishma kansa becheskas basula v'nimsas bula." You can't learn out your halacha about marrying with the presumption she's a basula and then finding out she's a baula yesh l'ksuba. You can't have a proof because it's different. The shani ocha sharei kansa rishon, because here there was a marriage, and now who cares that there was a marriage? There's Adam that say there was no relations, but still he apparently can have that response. So kol shekena masnisin, certainly he'd have that response on the Mishnah. There's not even a guarantee of Adam that she had no relations with the first husband. So you can certainly have that conversation between Rab and Rav Ashi on the Mishnah. However, if you learn the conversation going on the Mishnah, you can't have that conversation then on the Braisa. Meaning meaning to say, from the Braisa, Rabba really does have a proof. If the conversation was only on the Mishnah, it could be that Rav Ashi would not have responded to Rabba on the Braisa, because there it really is Cheskas Basula, turns out to be a Ba'ula, because you have witnesses. There Rav Ashi wouldn't respond, oh, it's different over here, Sharei Kansa Rishon, because she was previously married, because he could say, look, I'm relying on the witnesses. The witnesses say she had no relations. So then, again, if you're learning the conversation on the Mishnah, certainly from the Braisa you would see this idea that Kansa b'cheskas basula v'nimsas ba'ula gets a ksuba. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Ha'ochel etzel chamiv b'Yehuda. Let's say somebody's eating by his father-in-law's house in Yehuda. Shalo be'edim, and there are no witnesses. Eino yachol lito tainas basulim. He can't later make a claim that it turns out she wasn't a basula. Mipnei shemisyach edima, because as we've mentioned before in Yehuda, they would go into seclusion. He would be in seclusion with her. It was a way of getting comfortable with the person's wife, or with the person's future wife, and so therefore in this case there is no tainas basulim. And the Gemara says, midikatani ha'ochel, from the fact that the Mishnah says one who eats by his father-in-law in Yehuda, so mechlal de'iko duchta b'Yehuda nami deloachel. It sounds like there are places in Yehuda where a person wouldn't be by his father-in-law. Like this is something that wasn't universal across all of Yehuda. And the Gemara says, Amar Abaya says, Shema Mino, you see from our Mishnah, b'Yehuda nami, in Yehuda also, Mekomos yesh, there were various places, and some places conducted themselves in this manner, meaning to say that the husband and the wife, they would be together even in the Kiddushin period in order to get accustomed to one another. And then there were some places in Yehuda Yehuda where they did not have that practice. Rashi over here says, Mekomos Yesha Chalukim b'minhagim, they had different minhagim. V'nafkamina de'echad lo nigili achid yachol liton. So there's an obvious nafkamina. If you have a place in Yehuda where the custom was not for them to go into seclusion with one another, then he could have a tainus basulim, because again, it didn't happen because of him, because they were never in seclusion with one another. And the Gemara continues, Kidatanya, this is as we learned in a brisa. The brisa itself will talk about the fact that there were different areas with different customs. Amar Rav Yehuda says, Be Yehuda, when it came to Yehuda, Barishona, in the beginning, Hayu miyachten es achosen vesakala, Shah achas kodem knisasan l'chuppah. So they would have the chosen and the kala, they would go into seclusion with one another an hour before the time of the chuppah. Kedei sheyehei libo gaspa, that was in order that the person should get accustomed, they should get accustomed to one another. Uvegalil lo hayu osen kain, but in the Galil, they did not do that. Furthermore, the Brisa says, "Yehuda barishona hayu ma'amidin lahem shnei shushvinin." In Yehuda, in the beginning, they used to have two groomsmen. Echad lo v'echad lo. One was on his behalf, one was on her behalf. Kedei lamash meshas hachosen v'yasakala. They would essentially examine the chosen and the kala b'shas knisasan l'chuppah at the time they entered the chuppah. Again, that was to make sure that the evidence would be good evidence in terms of whether she was a besula or not. Uvegalil lo hayu osen kain. And again, in Galil, they did not do that. But Yehuda barishona, and the Brisa continues in Yehuda at the beginning, Hayu shushvinin yeshenim bebayis shechasan v'kal yeshenim ba. Those groomsmen, they would sleep in the same house that the chasan and the kala slept in. Again, the same idea, because they were there to examine and make sure that the evidence was not tampered with. Uvegalil lo hayu osen kain. In Galil, they did not do that. Now the Brisa ends, v'chol shelo noah kaminag hazeh. Anybody who doesn't conduct himself in this kind of a minhag, eino yachol liton tainus basulim, is not able to make the tainus basulim. Now the Gemara is not exactly sure what this last line means. Ahaya, what is this going on? Ilema aresha, if it's going on the resha, meaning the resha was talking about the fact that in Yehuda, miyachten es achosen v'esakala, that they had yichud, so it's saying anyone who did not do this, so then there's no claim of tainus basulim. That wouldn't make sense. Ilema aresha kol shenoag mi boile. It should be anyone who does accustom themselves. Anyone who does do like they do in Yehuda cannot make a tainus basulim. That's the whole point. If you have yichud before the marriage, then you can't make a tainus basulim. So it should be kol shenoag, not kol shalonog. And so the Gemara says ela seifa. So rather it would be going on the seifa, but the problem there is it should say kol shalom mushmash mi boile. It shouldn't have to do with the minhag. It should be anyone who was not examined. If you're not examined properly, so then again there's no tainus basulim. And so the Gemara says Amar Abaya says liolam aresha. Really, we are going on the resha in terms of the yichud. Betani kol shanog, just change it, instead of kol shalonog, it should be kol shanog. Amar le Rava, so Rava said to him, to Abaya, v'hakol shalonog katani, but it says shalonog. How could you change it? Elamar Rava, rather Rava says, Hachi Kamer, here's how you understand it. Kol shalonog minig galil begalil. We're going on galil. Anyone who doesn't do the custom of galil in galil, ela minig Yehuda begalil, but instead follows the minig of Yehuda in galil, and they go into seclusion with one another, eino yachalit on tainus basulim. Then there's no longer a claim of basulim. Rav Ashi says, liolam ha-seifa, you can actually say it is going on the seifa, v'tani kol shalom mushmash, and instead again have the text be anyone who was not examined. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Achas Almonas Yisrael, V'achas Almonas Kohanim. It doesn't matter if the Almona is a Yisraelis, meaning a Bas Yisrael. It doesn't matter if she's a Bas Kohen, Ksubasa Masayim. She gets a Ksuba of 100. Bezin Shel Kohanim Hayugovin Levesula, Arba Meo Zuz. Now the Bezin of Kohanim, they used to say that a Basula who was a Bas Kohen could actually get 400 zuz, that's double the amount of a standard Basula. V'lo Michu B'yadam Chachamim. And the Chachamim did not protest against this. Rashi over here says, Almonas Kohanim, Almona Bas Kohen. Again, like we said, an Almona who's a Bas Kohen is treated the same as an Almona Yisrael. Hayugovin lebasula, and then it said the Bezin of Kohanim would give a Basula Bas Kohen, meaning a Basula who is a Bas Kohen, Kishenisas La Kohen. When she would marry a Kohen, she would actually get 400 zuz in the Ksuba. But Kol Shekain Kishenisas La Yisrael. Certainly when she married Yisrael, for sure, she's going to be entitled to the 400 zuz. And the Gemara continues, Tana, it was taught, V'almonas kohanim ksubasa masayim. It says the almona, again talking about the Bas Kohen, she gets 200 zuz, not like our Mishnah, which says 100 zuz. So the Gemara asks, V'anon tanan, but didn't we learn in our Mishnah, Achas almonas Yisrael, V'achas almonas kohanim. It doesn't matter if she's a Bas Yisrael, Bas Kohen, ksubasa masayim. If she's an almona, she gets a ksuba of 100. Seems to contradict this brisa. And the Gemara answers, Amar Rav Ashi says, Shtei takonas have it. There were actually two separate takonas. Meikara takinu levasula arba meozuzulu almona mona. Originally, they said that a basula would get 400 zuz, again talking about the Bas Kohen, and the almona would get 100. Rashi says, Shtei takonas have it, almona Bas Kohen. There were two separate takonas when it came to the almona Bas Kohen, and we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yud Beis Amud Beis.